Hey, Steve Mignoni here, and you're watching the Steve Mag's Muscle Car Show podcast. This is episode 67. We're going to actually begin the world of Studebaker muscle here. So far in my 2013 book, Steve Mignoni's 1001 Muscle Car Facts, we've covered Chevrolet, Pontiac, Olds, Buick, Ford, Mercury, even I think a little bit of Lincoln. And then, of course, we did Dodge and Plymouth and Chrysler and American Motors. Now we get into the world of Studebaker. So let's start in a second, but before I do, I want to thank our sponsors here at High Octane Classics in Auburn, Massachusetts at 143 Washington Street. This is a 2018 Dodge Demon I'm sitting next to. It's a 4-year-old car, but it has super low miles. It's really clean, and it blows my mind that this car will go 9-second quarters. It's an absolute bone stock factory muscle car, and all the cars inside of my book here, from the golden age of the muscle car, are slow by comparison to a Demon, let alone a GT500 or a new Camaro ZR1 or whatever it might be. So these are basically amazing days we're living in right now. The good old days are right now. But again, High Octane Classics has modern muscle and the classic stuff. Roadrunners, Chargers, SS396s, Novas, Camaros, and Ferraris and Porsches if you want to go there too. So give them a call at 508-859-4515. And let's now get started in my 2019 book, Steve Mignoni's 1001 Muscle Car Facts. And again, this is episode number 67, and we begin the Studebaker component. Now, each of these chapters are broken into 5 subsections, legend and lore, body and interior, and then engines and drivelines, and then suspension and brakes, and finally, number crunching and press commentary. So in this episode, we're going to do legend and lore and body and interior Studebaker style. Let's get it started with fact 951. Every muscle car enthusiast knows what an STP sticker looks like. But is there a Studebaker tie-in? Yes. STP oil treatment was first introduced in 1952 as a product of Chemical Compounds Incorporated of St. Joseph, Missouri. An abbreviation for scientifically treated petroleum, STP was a thriving business when Studebaker president Sherwood Egbert acquired the company and trademark on March 1st, 1961. So it's true that classic oval red sticker with the white STP, which doesn't stand for Stone Temple Pilots, so they co-opted the brand in the late 90s, early 80s, whatever it was. But anyway, STP, absolutely, Studebaker owned scientifically treated petroleum for many years. And let's keep that ball rolling with fact 952. The claim that STP stands for Studebaker Transmission Products is just a myth. That said, after the 1961 acquisition, the STP trademark was briefly co-opted to stand for Studebaker Tested Products. Soon after, Egbert, the president of Studebaker, realized the popular oil supplement was best kept as a standalone product. STP, under the leadership of Andy Granatelli, was a strong source of profits and positive PR through its many Indy 500 attempts and active support of all facets of professional motorsports. And it's true that STP, if you remember, I think it was 1967, the Indy turbine pace car, or not pace car, it was a race car, it was turbine-powered STP stickers all over that thing, the wedge, the flying wedge of 1967, 68, I think it was, maybe 69. But again, it was a turbine-powered car, it was STP red, and Andy Granatelli was the guy behind that whole thing. Of course, you get into the early 1970s, and Richard Petty goes from Petty Blue to Petty Blue and STP Red on his Chargers circa 1973 into the mid-70s. So STP is certainly a major thing, but yes, deep roots in Studebaker, although not grown from Studebaker. Okay, let's move on now to Studebaker and its various Canadian links and offshoots. Fact 953. Some think Studebaker died a broke, beaten company, but the termination of Canadian vehicle production in March of 1966 wasn't the end of Studebaker as a corporation, not by a long shot. Rather, Studebaker thrived for more than a decade as a closed investment company, a conglomerate corporation with numerous non-automotive divisions. The diversification was instigated in 1958 and funded by the surprise success of the compact 1958 Studebaker Lark and shrewd stock transactions. which created huge cash reserves and tax incentives. Having grown weary with the fickle auto industry and numerous brushes with bankruptcy, Studebaker's management team invested in numerous non-endemic businesses. CTL, maker of plastic nose cones for missiles, Franklin Home Appliances, Italian appliance maker Domowatt S.p.A., Gravely Lawn Tractors, Trans-International Airlines, industrial refrigerant giant Schaefer, STP Lubricants, Paxton Products, and others. In 1961 alone, these divisions did more than $100 million in sales. When Studebaker terminated automobile production, these other entities carried the torch, some successfully, some less so. Last known as Studebaker Worthington, and with annual sales in excess of $1 billion, the Studebaker name ceased to exist after absorption by McGraw-Edison in 1979. That same year, the Avanti Motor Company, which was not affiliated with Studebaker Worthington, enjoyed its best season to date with 179 cars sold. So it is true that the Studebaker automobile division, if you will, was only one part of the octopus that was Studebaker. They lived on in many ways. Okay, let's go into something kind of interesting here. They say invest in plastics. If you ever watched the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman, he's given that advice. Invest in plastic. Well, Studebaker and Packard and plastic kind of go together a little bit, if you bear with me. This is fact number 958. At great expense, Studebaker, Packard, and AMC all tooled their own modern overhead valve V8 engines in the post-World War II era. These variously successful engine families displaced 239, 259, 289, and 304 cubic inches, Studebaker, 320, 352, and 374 cubic inches, Packard, and 250, 287, and 327, American Motors. Model builders will recognize the architecture of Renwall Plastics visible V8 quarter-scale plastic model kit of the 1960s is being that of a Packard V8. The kit is currently offered by Revell, and here is a picture right here of one of those Renwall visible V8s, and if you look at it, you'll see it's a Packard V8. A lot of folks say that's a Chevy small block. The way the cylinder heads are laid out, the intake ports, the rocker arms, the valve train, it's all certainly Packard inspired. It's kind of weird. It's a two-barrel induction on this thing, so it must have been the small Packard 320, which was Packard's entry-level engine found in Clippers and stuff like that. But again, Packard was the source of the design inspiration for the Renwall visible V8 quarter-scale model, which you may or may not have built. I've done a few of them. And of course, Revell, still alive and well, they now have those tools, and you can still get one. But again, AMC, Packard, and Studebaker all made their own V8s in the 1950s. Very expensive. With that said, let's get back to Canada with Studebaker and fact number 955. What was the rationale for continuing to build Studebakers in Canada? To put it bluntly, had Studebaker simply slammed the door shut in Indiana, the remaining 2,025 dealers, of which 1,700 were in the United States and 325 in Canada, would have flooded the company with lawsuits. The plan also avoided further payment into UAW, United Auto Workers, pension funds. Remember, Studebaker wasn't out of business. It simply quit building cars. We're talking in the end of 1961. There were huge assets to be protected. The Canadian scheme was a means of winding down automotive production in a graceful fashion. Legal, yes. Ethical, you decide. Despite the fact that Hamilton, Ontario, Canada plant was profitable, its 7,000 unit annual break-even point was met by a factor of 3 over 20,000 cars per year. The truth was Studebaker management didn't want to continue making cars. Approximately 19,000 Canadian-made Studebakers were imported to the United States in 1965 and 66 as corporate automotive activity ground slowly to a halt. Okay, so there you have it. Basically, Studebaker did not go down in flames. They just stopped making cars. And to get away from, attacks from U.S. auto dealers, salesmen, 2,025 dealers here in the States, or actually 1,700 in the States and the rest in Canada, who probably would have cried bloody murder and sued Studebaker. They wound it down gently and slowly and quietly up in Canada. So that's kind of how they did it. The Canadian Studebakers are kind of collectible. We'll talk more about that as the book unfolds. Okay, fact 956, let's talk about the engines and displacements and more confusion about those things. Fact 956. There's plenty of confusion regarding the origins of certain Studebaker power plants. Though Ford offered a 289 cubic inch V8 in 1963, Studebaker's 289, a completely different engine, was first offered in 1956, and there was no crossbreeding. Confusion stirred again in 1964 with the closure of the South Bend factory. For a brief time, U.S.-made Studebaker 169 cubic inch 6s and 259 and 289 cubic inch V8s were shipped north of the border to the Studebaker of Canada plant, which lacked engine manufacturing capabilities. But when the South Bend engine plant's union contract ended a few months into 1964, so did the supply of these Studebaker engines. To solve the problem, Studebaker sourced 194,000, reset that. To solve the problem, Studebaker sourced 194. To solve the problem, Studebaker sourced its 194 and 230 cubic inch 6-cylinders and 283 V8s from McKinnon Industries, which was a Canadian subcontractor to General Motors. Yes, these were Chevrolet engines built by McKinnon under license from General Motors, and they were installed in all 65 and 66 Studebakers. That's why Studebakers have Chevy engines when they're made in 65 and 6 in Canada. Ready for more confusion? Me too. In 1965 and 66, Studebaker marketed the Chevy-sourced 283 as the Thunderbolt V8, the same term used to designate the 427-powered Ford Fairlanes in 1964. What a tangled web we weave. And again, as they say, what's in a name? Okay, moving on. Let's get back to McKinnon Industries in Canada. You might, what the heck is a McKinnon? Fact number 957 helps to explain. The McKinnon Chevrolet engines were much more costly than earlier Studebaker-built engines. Before production ceased, South Bend-built Studebaker engines cost the Canadian plant $190 for the 169 overhead valve 6, $214 for the base 259 V8. The Chevrolet-sourced mills cost $315 and $434 respectively for the 6 and the 8, and doubled the plant's break-even point to 14,000 cars per year. Incidentally, the Canadian plant only handled Commander, Cruiser, and Daytona models. All Hawk, Avanti, and truck production was terminated after the 1964 model run, with one notable exception, the Avanti. A moment ago, I mentioned Studebaker closed its doors in 61 or 2. It was 63. Now we know. All right, fact number 958. The thought of watching the Avanti wither on the vine was unacceptable to former Studebaker dealer Nate Altman. With business partner Leo Newman, Altman purchased 6 dormant buildings within the massive South Bend complex and restarted Avanti production as the Avanti II in 1965. The only major change was the use of Chevy small block engines and GM-sourced transmissions. Otherwise, the car remained true to Loewy's, the designer Raymond Loewy's, original intent, and stands as a very rare example of the successful revival of an ailing marque by passionate investors. And if you don't know, the Studebaker Avanti was really a breakthrough car. In addition to the Corvette, it was one of a handful of cars made in this country that had fiberglass bodies. And again, Avanti means forward in Italian, and it was supposed to be the halo car that brought Studebaker back from the brink. Well, it didn't really work out, but again, Nate Altman and a combine of Studebaker dealers decided to save the day, and so they came up with the Avanti II. They bought the tooling from Studebaker, and the Avanti II lived on well into the 1970s. Some of them with, they all had Chevy power. Interesting stuff. Okay, let's talk about here, yes, the final Studebakers. This is fact 959. The last U.S.-built Studebaker rolled off the South Bend, Indiana assembly line on December 20th, 1963. It was a red Daytona 2-door hardtop, a very cool-looking car. Initially consigned to a dealer in Pennsylvania, Studebaker instead chose to keep the car. It currently resides in the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana. The final Canadian-built Studebaker left the Hamilton, Ontario plant on March 4th, 1966. A V8-powered turquoise Lark Land Cruiser it's also on display at the Studebaker Museum. So it's true. Remember that Studebaker was not down and out. They weren't bankrupt. They were still making nose cones for missiles, lawnmowers, and air conditioners and kitchen appliances. They just stopped making cars. So they had the money to be, able to buy their own cars and hang on to these last-built vehicles. And those cars still exist. Again, at the museum in South Bend, Indiana. Visit sometime. It's a pretty cool place. Okay, let's get into more V8 information from Studebaker with fact 960. Pioneering Studebaker speed seekers were surprised to discover that 1955 and 56 Cadillac Eldorado dual quad intake manifolds can be adapted to the 1951 through 64 Studebaker V8 with only a small amount of effort. The attachment bolt holes need reaming and hand-cut gaskets are needed. It is one of the few happy coincidences in the hot rod world. Going the other way, 1950s hot rodders discovered the sleek 1953 Studebaker Starliner hardtop was a perfect home for the Cadillac overhead valve V8. Hot Rod magazine depicted many Studilac engine swaps and was directly responsible for spurring the Golden Hawk factory muscle package of 1956. We'll talk about that in a little while, but it is true that the Studebaker Starliner, if you study Bonneville speed record racing, the Starliner was a very sleek car. In fact, AMT does a really nice 1/25th scale plastic model of it, but they're favorites amongst Bonneville land speed records because they're very aerodynamic. They're smooth, they're low, they're long. But again, Cadillac V8s fit into those things really well, as do Chrysler Hemis or anything else. But on the other side of that coin, if you want to put some extra power into your Studebaker V8, look for a Cadillac intake manifold from a 55, 56 application. And with minor grinding, they fit. So you can put dual quads or even a tri-power off of an Eldorado onto your Studebaker 289 and have some extra power. All right, let's move on to the next chapter, or subchapter, if you will. Engine and, number, what is this here? Yes, Legend and Lore comes to an end. Now we begin Body and Interior with 10 more facts on Studebaker bodies and interiors. With that said, I want to take a moment and thank our sponsors here at High Octane Classics at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. I'm sitting here right now next to this 2018 Demon. This is one of about 100 special interest muscle and collector cars they have in stock here at High Octane Classics. Today is March 8th, 2022. This car may or may not be around if you call to inquire about it, or the other 100 or so cars here. So call soon if you want to know more about this Demon. It's a cool piece. To give them a call, just ring 508-859-4515. Okay, let's get back to my 1001 Muscle Car Facts book from 2013. You can find these online. I think it's out of print now, but you can buy it or listen to this podcast. Again, this is episode number 67. And the previous 66 episodes take you through Chevy, Ford, Pontiac, Buick, Mopar, all of that stuff, and American Motors too. So here we are. Let's begin now with Studebaker body and interior information and facts. Fact 961. Studebaker installed 1-inch shims between the frame and body of every Avanti equipped with the R3 engine option, of which 9 were built. The extra height was needed to provide clearance between the large cast aluminum carburetor pressure box, which was supercharged, and the underside of the hood. Unfortunately, the Avanti's unique hood bulge, described as a speed ramp by Raymond Loewy's design team, was asymmetrically positioned ahead of the driver, so it couldn't be reconfigured for pressure box clearance, which was centered directly over the carburetor. The added inch of body height raised the vehicle's center of gravity, but budget-conscious Studebaker engineers chose this route rather than endure the cost and aesthetic burdens of adding a hood blister. And again, there were 9 of these things made. It was the supercharged 304, the R3, which was a pretty exotic hand-built engine, but again, because the fiberglass body of the Avanti bolted to a Studebaker Lark frame by adding 1-inch spacers, shims, well, they made hood clearance. Kind of a weird way of going about it, but another thing they did too was they increased the gap between the tire and the top of the wheel lip, which designers call dead cat space. Don't ask me why. But with that said, that 1 inch increased the height of a supercharged Avanti a little bit. So if you're a street racer, if you see an Avanti sitting a little high on its wheels, probably an R3. Okay, fact 962. When When Studebaker closed shop in 1963, a company called Molded Fiberglass Body still had 150 semi-completed body shells on hand for the Avanti. This made it easier for ex-Studebaker dealer Nate Altman to keep momentum going for his Avanti 2 continuation project. Without Altman, it's likely the bodies would have been scrapped. Under various subsequent leadership teams, Altman's Avanti 2 was produced in limited quantities through 1990. Looming passive restraint mandates, airbags, automated chill belt mechanisms, etc., squashed further output, though persistent sparks of interest rise from the ashes even to this day. It is true, the Avanti 2, all the way up through 1990, they got weird. They were based on Firebirds, and they got strange. The purest Avantis are the ones made until about 1982, 3, 4. And then they started doing four-doors and convertibles, which were interesting, but they were unusual, put it like that. But some people love the Avanti 2 right to the 1990 model year. Now, elements of the body design are interesting. They may or may not make a repeat or a comeback, but again, they're interesting cars. But the best Avantis were the ones made by Studebaker, in my book. All right, unless you own an Avanti 2, I love those too. All right, fact 963, let's talk about the Avanti and some of the issues they had. Studebaker resisted assigning model years to the Avanti. During a 19-month production period running from June 1962 through December 1963, a long list of running changes were made to the Avanti. In August of 63, the square headlight bezels were phased in from the round ones. These cars are regarded as 1964 models. Of the 4,643 Avantis built in total, only 752 were fitted with the square bezels. The only true model year identification method is to check the VIN. The first and second digits correspond to the vehicle model year, i.e. 63 for a 1963 and 64 for a 1964. Drivers who don't like wet shoulders on rainy days should get a car built after April of 1963 when drip rails were added to the roof seams above the doors. So again, the details on the Avanti it's sort of a work in progress. And again, Avanti, Studebaker didn't want to assign a model year to these things because they made them in such limited numbers, whereas other vehicles in the Studebaker lineup, they absolutely made a big deal out of the 62, 63 Lark, or the Hawk, or whatever it might be, but not so the Avanti. All right, let's move on to, speaking of the Lark, fact number 964. The 1963.5 and 1964 Super Lark performance package included a limited slip differential, heavy-duty springs and shocks, front and rear anti-sway bars, finned rear brake drums, front disc brakes, traction links, 670/15 tires, and either a T10 4-speed or heavy-duty Borg-Warner automatic transmission. The R1, which is a 289 4-barrel, naturally aspirated, the R2, a 289 4-barrel with a supercharger, and the R3, that big 304 4-barrel with a supercharger, and the R4, a 304 dual quad, naturally aspirated V8. These engines were all available. The R3's thicker harmonic damper, wide supercharger drive pulley, and inlet air feed duct required a specific radiator support stamping, not shared with standard 6-cylinder or V8 Larks, nor R1, R2, or R4 cars. The R3's unique radiator support was later adopted for all Canadian-built Larks in 65 and 66. It turns out the inline Chevy 194 and 230 overhead valve 6 was longer than the tiny Studebaker 169 inline 6 and interfered with the standard Lark radiator support. But the R3 stamping worked perfectly. R3 Super Lark restorers and replicators seeking replacement radiator support panels need look no further than any 65 or 66 6-cylinder equipped Lark from Canada. The part's right there if you need it. Now you know. Okay, so to go back a little bit here into the world of the V8s and the superchargers in the 1950s with fact number 965. Packard Hawks were built in 1958 only. Each of the 588 built muscle machines featured a centrally mounted hood scoop that was an essential ingredient for allowing use of its standard Studebaker source supercharged 289 V8. But don't assume the scoop was there for better breathing. Rather, the hood bulge and faux scoop were simply a means to achieve needed clearance between the cast aluminum carburetor pressure box and low-slung steel hood skin. The opening was sealed shut by a die-cast metal trim plate. And again, second installation or mention here of raising the hood up. In other words, we saw the Avanti have the 1-inch shims to get the air cleaner and the hood apart from each other. But when it comes to the 58 Packard Hawk, they actually added on a little plastic blister to the hood with a hole to make room for the airbox. Okay, more Packard Golden Hawk and Super Hawk information with fact 966. The hood line of a supercharged 1957, of which Studebaker Golden Hawk, of which 4,071 were made, and 1958 Studebaker Golden Hawk, of which 878 were made, wasn't as low as the Packard Hawk, but still required a small bolt-on fiberglass blister. It sealed a hole that had to be manually cut into the steel hood skin to accommodate the carburetor pressure box once again. The 1956 only Golden Hawk was naturally aspirated, no supercharger, and relied on the sheer displacement of the Packard-supplied 352 V8, which was much larger than the 289 supercharged engine. Not as tall as the supercharged 289s used in 57 and 58 Golden Hawks, the 56 Golden Hawk hood skin lacks the blisters seen on 57 and 58 models. That said, all 1956 Hawks, including the lowly 185 six-banger, Flight Hawk, shared the same twin nostril hood scoop insert bolted atop the hood. It was a strictly non-functional styling flourish. Speaking of styling flourishes, the fiberglass tail fins and trunk lid of the 1956 Golden Hawk were replaced by steel parts in the 1957 edition. It is true that if in the 1950s, of course, the tail fin was all the rage, and at Studebaker, they actually early on whipped up a quick fiberglass bolt-on tail fin to keep up with the neighbors over at Chevrolet and Ford and Chrysler. Again, Studebaker was using tooling that was born in 1953 all the way through the early 60s. They couldn't afford to upgrade, so they used fiberglass add-ons. But even those fiberglass add-ons were upgraded to steel add-ons as we get into the 1957 model year. Okay, let's keep going here. Back to Studebaker Avanti information with fact 967. Far away from the staid confines of the main styling department in South Bend, Indiana, design of the Avanti's futuristic fiberglass body shell was initiated on Monday, March 20th, 1961 by a team of freelance stylists led by Raymond Loewy. Under his guidance, Tom Kellogg, Bob Andrews, and John Epstein toiled for 6 weeks in a rented home on the outskirts of Palm Springs, California. Though Loewy owned a home nearby, the team didn't want to occupy Loewy's... Hang on. Stick these pages together here. Okay, the team didn't want to occupy Loewy's residence, so an alternate location was leased for the purpose of designing the Avanti. On the wall was an image of the 1961 Lincoln Continental. Lincoln liked its slab-sided form and blade-like fender peaks. Pictures of other advanced vehicle designs plastered the walls and served as inspiration. The entire affair was very art school, and the results show it. The team conjured the Avanti shapes in a mere 40 days. If you don't know what an Avanti looks like, Google Studebaker Avanti, and you'll see a very modern and futuristic car, considering it was designed in 1961. And the design all the way through 1990 kind of held water, although it was best viewed up till about 1975. After that, big weird bumpers were added and stuff, but the purest Avantis are great looking cars. Okay, more Studebaker V8 supercharger history with fact 968. The supercharged R2 289 engine was offered on any 1963 or 64 Studebaker model and cost an extra $210 on the Avanti, $581 on the Hawk, $701 on the Cruiser, or $731 on the Daytona, or on the Commander, $766. Again, that's for the supercharged 289. But due to compact body architecture, the Avanti applications moved the supercharger location to the front of the passenger side cylinder head. The extra cowl height of the Lark-based Cruiser, Daytona, Commander, and Hawk engine bays allowed the R2 spec packs and supercharger to be mounted high atop the engine, directly in front of the Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetor. Rated output was not affected by the different intake tract layouts. So keep in mind, a supercharged 289 Studebaker R2 engine there are two very different versions of it. The supercharger is located up top or down low, depending on whether or not it came in a passenger car or an Avanti. If you're restoring either one of those cars, you got to shop accordingly for your R2 289 supercharger parts. Make sure the stuff goes to your body, the car you're using it in. Now you know. All right. Speaking of Avantis and fiberglass, that brings us to fact 969. Like the Corvette body, the Avanti fiberglass body was not effective at containing ignition noise and preventing radio reception problems. Every radio-equipped Avanti engine was fitted with stainless steel shrouding around the distributor and secondary ignition wires to further isolate ignition energy from degrading radio reception, also known as RFI, radio frequency interference. The antenna mast was positioned atop the left rear quarter panel. Corvettes utilized a similar strategy to improve signal reception. So it's true that if you look at any Corvette with a radio or any Avanti with a radio, you will see there's this weird shiny metal around the wires and distributor. But here's the other side of the coin. On Corvettes with radio delete, maybe 2% came that way. That shielding is not there. The distributor's in plain view. So unless it's been manipulated, if you open the hood on a Corvette or an Avanti and see the distributor and the wires, there's no radio inside. Okay, let's get to more information here on supercharged Avanti engines with fact 970. Aside from the notable difference in acceleration, Avanti drivers seated behind supercharged R2 and R3 power plants were greeted by different tachometers. The R3 tachometer reached 8,000 RPM, while regular R1 Avantis have a 6,000 RPM tachometer. Supercharged Avanti drivers, regardless of engine tune, quickly learned to roll down the windows on summer days. That's because air conditioning was only available at $280 with a naturally aspirated 240 horsepower R1 base engine. Later Avanti 2s catered to luxury-seeking customers by making GM's C60 air conditioning a readily available option on all models. Although that said, the Avanti 2 under Nate Altman, the continuation cars, I don't think any of those things had superchargers. They were pretty much all 350 Chevy powered with a carburetor. But when you get down to the Studebaker built Avantis, anything with an air conditioner will not have supercharging. The stuff just wouldn't fit. The blower was in the way, the air compressor, they would have fought. So if you have a supercharged Avanti, the only cooling you can get is rolling the windows down and hitting the gas pedal. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, which is episode 67 of the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast. I want to thank our sponsors here at High Octane Classics here in Auburn, Massachusetts at 133 Washington Street. And I'm sitting here with this beautiful 2018 Demon. It's one of about 100 special interest collector and muscle cars they have for sale. And I'm recording this today on March 8th, 2022. Hopefully by the time you call, it's still here. Don't bank on it. But with that said, there's about another 100 cars here that you might like. One off. There's Ferraris, Porsches, Mustangs, Camaros, you name it. They have great examples. Even Ford Lightning pickup trucks, they got them here. Give them a call at 508-859-4515 or visit the High Octane Classics website, where I host a number of videos walking around these cars. So be sure to visit them. And also, we'll do another couple episodes of the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast as we make our way to fact number 1001, following the Studebaker tradition, coming up shortly. Until then, hasta mañana.